Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. It turns out this is Vagina Week. First, we talked about designer vaginas in our last episode, and my Brooklyn keeps coming out when I say that. Designer vaginas, Dr. Jennifer Berman. And today we're going to be talking about orgasmic leadership with Vagipreneurs leading the way in the female health space with Braun Scherl. Orgasmic leadership has finally arrived. I've waited to say that sentence forever. This is the first female sexual health leadership book of interviews and experiences from amazing entrepreneurs and vagipreneurs who are changing the world. That was a Freudian slip, changing the word. I love that word, vagipreneurs, by developing products and services that women want, need, and deserve. And have I mentioned waited a really, really long time for? The author, Braun Scherl, is going to tell us all about it. We're going to talk about, first of all, how she came up with that awesome title. Second of all, where the term vagipreneur came from. And we're going to talk about everything that's happening in the female health education space, new business models, and companies that are offering solutions and making a huge social impact at the same time. So what I call doing well by doing good. And of course, I'm not going to be able to resist talking about the quote unquote female Viagra. So Rachel is the picture of the consummate, dynamic, passionate business leader. She is a respected strategist and entrepreneur. She has successfully launched, built, and turned around companies big and small around the globe. She builds businesses based on the belief that sustainable, profitable growth must start with a sound strategy and be continually driven forward by connecting with customers, building partnerships, and creating revenue. Can we get you in government? I wouldn't do that to you. She's as managing partner of Spark Solutions for Growth, which is a strategic growth consultancy. Rachel has led global consulting engagements with international clients, including J&J, Allergan, Pfizer, Bayer, and Deloitte. In addition, Rachel has helped build numerous startups emphasizing female health. Now, previously, one of Rachel's most interesting jobs that I know about, she was co-founder and president of Sempre Laboratories, which was a venture-backed company focused on the idea that all women deserve sexual satisfaction. The company was built around Zestra, a product that was patented, and it was a blend of botanical oils and extracts, which was clinically shown to increase arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women. And yes, it is still available, but the company was sold to Innovis Pharmaceuticals in 2013. Rachel is a widely desired speaker. She has a series she calls Rachel Talks Speaker Series, and she shares her experiences driving change and achieving results in a wide range of categories and situations as a business professional and as a woman in business. She has frequently spoken at corporate events, universities, conferences, you name it, she's been there. Same with television. She's appeared on ABC's Nightline, CBS News, MSNBC, and been interviewed for many major print platforms from the New York Times to the Huffington Post. But my favorite article she recently wrote was, quote, "My mom is a vagipreneur," unquote, for CoveyClub.com, which was started by Leslie Jane Seymour, who was one of our original guests in the ladies' room when we talked about menopause. Anyway, in 2015, Rachel was recognized as one of the best 50 women in business by New Jersey Biz. She's a 2015 of Smart CEOs Brava Awards, honoring top female CEOs who are leaders of their companies and their communities. And she's also received numerous other awards. She's serves on the Duke New York Women's Executive Board, and she pointed out to me how many Duke alumni I've had as guests on this show. I've got to up my ante with some other schools. We've had a lot of Duke alumni, we've had Wellesley alumni, but I'm slipping with Princeton, which is my alma mater. I ramped that up. The Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation for Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, and Formula XO, a specialty beauty company. So I just told you Rachel earned her BA from Duke, or you could have guessed that from the conversation. She graduated magna cum laude and Pi Beta Kappa, and she got her MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. She is married and the mother of 2 adult children, and from having read the first chapter of her book, they provide some of her best material. Anyway, without further ado, please help me welcome Rachel. You are in the ladies' room.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that very generous introduction. I appreciate it. It's great to be with you.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. Actually, it's funny talking about how the kids provide your greatest source of material. And that was true for me as a speaker for many, many years. But now it's payback time because my daughter is an adult and has become an actress and a comedian. And
oh, you're in trouble. You hear yourself coming out of her mouth.
I have seen a lot of her material, me in her material, in her stand-up routine. And I know someday she's going to be on Saturday Night Live and I am going to be this caricature person that she does. But anyway, so what was your most interesting mommy conversation that you had with your kids about what you do as a vagipreneur?
I mean, there are so many, and many of them are quite comical. The one that stands out probably more than anything is when I first got into the space, my kids were young. My son was in elementary school and my daughter was just starting middle school. And I was explaining that, when people are in a relationship, and I obviously started with when they were married, although obviously I got more modern as they got more mature, that intimacy and sex is a very important part of a relationship. And sometimes it wasn't working or wasn't as enjoyable as the partners hoped it would be. And that mom had a company that had a product that helped that, improved the experience for women. And so my son, who always was an avid reader, paused for a minute and he says, "Oh, I get it. My autobiography would be called Diary of a Pimpy Kid." And I said, wow, it's one of those parenting moments when you say, I'm sure people are going to be coming trying to give me prizes for Mother of the Year, since my son, after my explanation of what I was doing for a career, decided that I was a pimp, which probably says something about how much of his screen time I should have been monitoring. But just crazy things, because one critical piece, and I know you know this in the work that you've done and your medical background, we don't have a good vocabulary around female health. In the most extreme example, I always say, when I go into big rooms of people and I'm starting to talk about female health, and Viagra is going to come up, the first question I always ask is, I just want a show of hands. Raise your hands up. How many people are looking, male or female, are looking for a partner with a 4-hour erection? And giggles. And without fail, very few people raise their hands. But if you were to ask people what's the one line they remember from what they've been inundated with the erectile dysfunction ads, it's that.
Yeah.
And this
my
concept
son used to be able to recite that whole disclaimer
yes.
word for word. But years ago, when I think flibanserin was going through its first iteration of FDA rounds, and flibanserin, for people who don't know, has been billed as the quote unquote female Viagra or the pink pill. And there were a lot of hopes that it would increase arousal in women. And I was doing an interview about estrogen and hormone replacement therapy, and talking about the benefits of postmenopausal women for their libido with estrogen and other hormone therapies. And the interviewer said to me, "Is this the female Viagra?" And without even thinking about it, I said, "No, Viagra only operates on one small piece of real estate."
And that's one of the most amazing things. And one of the reasons, and I often go back to this part about the language, is that the actual physiology, as you know, you're a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. I'm on the business side of female health. The male sexual response is a much simpler system. It's basically a hydraulic pump. You increase the blood flow with these vasodilators and the pump works. Right. And when you look at women, there's, as you know, as a physician and all the work that you do.
I know this as a woman who was married for 24 years.
Okay. And that is a much more complex interplay of multiple systems: physiological, psychological, social, emotional, behavioral, contextual. So this idea that there's a one-hit wonder.
Anger and hostility and resentment. And irritation.
Okay, so I think you've discussed this before. But in any case, the actual physiological situation is so much more complex that there is no little pink pill that can act on her brain and act on her blood flow and act on all the different systems and create a social and behavioral environment where she's aroused or has some desire. I happen to go to all the hearings for flibanserin, which was the product that Dr. Donica, you just mentioned. And I would say that every person in their lifetime who takes a drug that's approved in the United States should sit through that process. It is so eye-opening.
Yeah.
And the fact that
you got to see how the sausage is made.
Oh my gosh. And really, it's terrifying. It was reinforced for me that I really have no interest to see how the sausage was made because you think it's so much more science and medicine, but there's so many other factors at play. But in any case, every time we talk about this female Viagra, it reinforces how little we understand about female sexual response and really how complicated it is. You know, when I'm talking about arousal or solutions that are out there or companies working on products, people say, well, can it make my husband or my partner less annoying? And I'd say, listen, if I had a solution for that, I would have my own continent at this point. But this is all about figuring out what can you do in an intimate setting. Women also say to me, well, when are the moments when the laundry's done and the kids are doing what they're supposed to do and I like my partner and I have some free time and I'm not traveling? If you wait,
and I'm not bloated and I feel sexy and I'm not tired and the walls are painted exactly the right shade and
if you wait for that moment, no one's ever going to be having sex.
Right.
So one of the things that at least the female Viagra and some of these other products, Estra, that I worked on really talk about is they create a physical response, not in the case of flibanserin, that starts in the head, but creates a physical response, and then the female brain kicks in. Mm-hmm. But there's no, drink this glass and, you'll feel exactly how you want to feel.
Right. There's no magic pill.
There's no magic pill.
That's what we're still looking for. Just like we're still looking for the magic fountain of youth and the magic mood stabilizer. And the problem is, I once had this conversation with Mehmet Oz because he uses the word magic quite a bit on his show. And I said, and he also uses the word miracle a lot. And I said, in medicine, there's only really two situations that are a miracle. The first is the miracle of childbirth. And absolutely every time I did a vaginal delivery or a C-section, every time a baby actually came out of there, it was a miracle.
Amazing.
Absolute miracle. That's hands down a miracle. And then the only other miracle is when somebody like that famous situation with the coal miners in West Virginia and they're in a coma for 9 days. And then they wake up out of the coma and they say, can I have a hamburger? That's a miracle. Everything else is not a miracle. Everything else has its pros and its cons, its ups and its downs, and works for some people and not others, and works in some situations and not other situations. And quite honestly, that's actually what's fun about sex, because it's not predictable. You don't necessarily know, when all the stars are going to be aligned and that's all the circumstances are going to be right. Or sometimes you go to bed thinking, I am just too tired tonight. And one thing leads to another and you go from 0 to 60 in 2 minutes, or 2 minutes and 14 seconds if you're really lucky. I once got into a kind of, I won't say argument, I'll say a spat with Suzanne Summers on the Katie Couric show, because she was recommending that all women take hormone replacement therapy. And as you know, there's nothing that's right for all women. Not even Tylenol is right for all women, but certainly not hormone replacement therapy. And she was advocating it even for women before they were in menopause. And she said to me, and I was dialing it back, I was being the doctor and the FDA all rolled up into one. And I was saying, well, in this circumstance, yes, in this circumstance, no. And she said, well, don't you want women to have great sex all the time? And I snapped back, all I needed to do was to have great sex all the time was get divorced. But really, it comes back to my mommy answer.
I don't know that that's a product marketing strategy, but it certainly is funny.
Lots of people are trying it. But it comes back to my mommy answer to just about every question my kids ever asked me, until they were 12 and knew better than I did. And that is, it just all depends on everything. So I want to hear from you what the realm of everything is and what you discovered in your book and what you can share for us. And first of all, how'd you come up with the title, which is awesome, by the way?
Well, I thank you. I have to give credit for the great name, Vagipreneur, the great title, and Orgasmic Leadership to other people.
Okay.
So
We're good with that.
When I was running Zestra, which you mentioned, it was a patented blend of botanical oils and extracts clinically proven to increase arousal, desire, and satisfaction. And we were people in the business of female health. And we always emphasize the business piece because you're actually a doctor. People actually thought we were doctors. We would get emails that said doctor, because when you're talking about vagina and labia and orgasms and arousal, I guess people are hoping you're a doctor. So,
or they don't care because they just want seriously.
They just want information.
They just want the information. They're so desperate. And that was in what, 2008?
2008. And we used to say we felt half the time like we were at a Who concert when we would get trampled when we had the opportunity to tell people about the product. Oh, excuse me.
Everything okay?
So, in any case, Abby Ellen, who's a New York Times journalist and writes for a number of other publications, and she's a published author and she's brilliant. She said, "Oh, I get it. Like you're a person in female health, you're like a vagipreneur." And she came up with the name.
That's awesome.
We loved it. It became a shorthand. I said, "Do you want it? Because if you don't want it, I want it." We wound up trademarking it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really, so if someone else says they're a vagipreneur, you know that they're encroaching on my trademark status. In any case, I just loved it. It's a great shorthand. People love it. And it starts a conversation often about a topic that people are not that comfortable with.
Well, I remember the first time we met. We actually met at a cocktail party or dinner party or something.
Yes, I remember exactly where we were.
I remember exactly where we were and where we were standing, but I don't remember if you knew I was a physician. And when you started telling me what you did, and I responded, "Oh, Zestra." And you were like, "Oh, you know about this?" And I
was so excited.
So I remember that. So tell me how you came up with Orgasmic Leadership.
Again, I was at a meeting just about 2 years ago, and because we had so much trouble getting networks, cable stations, websites, radio stations to take our money for advertising, we basically built a PR campaign around the disparity between men and women's advertising. So that's really awesome. As a business strategy, I did a tremendous amount of public speaking. I became the face for the company, and I talked about female health and leadership and entrepreneurship. So I've been doing that in a public way in many of the places that you mentioned for quite a number of years. And a couple of years ago, I'm sitting next to a woman at a meeting. And when you work in female health and you're a woman, you get invited to every women's meeting you could think of. And this one happened to be just an amazing meeting. And this woman starts to talk to me. We start having a conversation. She's in a totally different field. Her name is Karen Kahn. And she said to me, I'll never forget it, "Rachel, it's so boring. Not saying, Rachel, you're boring, but everybody talks about leadership and entrepreneurship. You should talk about it in the context of the categories in which you work. You should talk about orgasmic leadership."
Love her.
To which I said, "That's the greatest name I've ever heard. But trust me when I tell you that based on my experience, while they like to hear the female health story and they want to hear the discussions of how the vagina works and female sexual response versus male sexual response, no one's ever advertising a speech saying, 'Come here, Rachel, talk about orgasms.' It just doesn't happen. It always has to be, yeah, it always has to be weaved in." And I said, and it just stuck with me. I said, "I don't know what to do with it, but it's amazing. And I wish I could figure out a way to use it." So literally about 6 months later, I'm sitting, I remember it was a very hot room. I'm sitting on a couch it just felt like a very claustrophobic room for some reason. And all of a sudden I said, "Orgasmic Leadership is the name for a book." And I composed an email and I sent it out to people I knew who were working in the space. And I said, "Listen, I'm thinking about this idea. It might be a series of articles. It might be a book. And I'd really like to interview you about your experience because my hypothesis is very few people wake up and say, I want to be a vagipreneur. I want to talk about vaginas all day." So really understanding what their journeys were, how they came to be in this space, what was similar about these people, what was different, what kind of backgrounds, what were their families like, but not at all, "Let me give you the sales and numbers of their businesses," which obviously is part of it, but really understanding the backstory. So 2 years later, what I just published, Orgasmic Leadership, Profiting from the Coming Surge in Women's Sexual Health and Wellness, was a reflection of, I did over 36 interviews with founders, CEOs, educators, all in the broadly defined female health and wellness space, and highlighted 19 of them and basically used this space as a way to illustrate very fundamental business principles. What people were doing with changes in technology, what opportunities were created by new distribution models, what were people now doing around social impact, what was the next generation of corporate profitability and social responsibility beyond buy a pair of shoes, give a pair of shoes. What kinds of problems were people coming up with solutions to? You know, there are very few new problems. What there often are just better solutions. And basically
sorry to interrupt, but even in this space, people have, I love what you said earlier about not having the language. We do have the language. We do have the vocabulary, certainly, but people are uncomfortable using the vocabulary that we have. So,
and I think medical people have it. I think certain people in the space have it, but we don't communicate as a society with that vocabulary.
Right. And I think also, even though the problems are well known, you ask any woman on carpool line what the problems are, they will tell you very clearly, but people have trouble articulating that or translating that into a business model. So I think that's, what you've really given people here as far as tools is first of all, the permission to say, this is a legitimate multi-billion-dollar space. I wish you had interviewed me for this book, maybe the second edition.
Well, that's what I said. I said, if people besides my mother buy it, I still have 19 more interviews and I can add to that and I can write Orgasmic Leadership, the sequel.
Well, so thousands of women will buy it after this, and it's going to be my book of the week next week on my Facebook Live video show. But I remember 100 years ago, I was a medical director at Sandoz, which is now Novartis. And I had to make a presentation to the CEO. And I was one of the first people in pharma medical marketing talking about how women's health was not just tits and ass and whatever was under the bikini, that women's health was heart disease and osteoporosis and cancer and headaches and all these things. And so I make this big presentation to the CEO. I was looking for a $50,000 marketing budget. That's it, which was basically my travel budget. Proposed this whole, Women's Health Education Center initiative that we were going to do. And he was a very stern, extremely intimidating Swiss-German guy. And he listened to the whole presentation, in silence. And then he looked at me, at the end I said, of course, any questions? It was the boardroom, of course, was all men. And he looked at me and he had this big finger that he used to point at people. And he pointed at my face and he said, Dr. Moore, how do you justify such a large budget for a niche population?
Okay, and you just totally set me up for my next story. I'm with
literally sucked up all my courage because I was much younger then. And I said, with all due respect, sir, I refuse to accept that 52% of the population is a niche market. And then there was absolute silence in the room. And then he just said, approved. Next.
So it's such a good segue. I was raising money in 2008 when the bottom's falling out of the financial markets and Shearson Lehman is going bankrupt. And even when people who are in the space now who are fundraising in much more flush times, one of the things that I saw very consistently is that when you hear about venture capitalists or professional money people evaluating businesses, when they look at technology, it might not be technology they use, but they could see its application. Mm-hmm. But when you come in with a female health product, all of a sudden it's a niche. So we would get hysterical, my business partner Mary and I, when they would say, well, how big a problem is this? My wife has never mentioned it. And, we would have liked to say, I'm pretty sure it's not because you're such a crafted partner, skilled partner in the bedroom, because 43% of women have sexual concerns and difficulties in their lives. And it's one of the few spaces that women don't talk about. So you're defining it as a niche when really you've never heard of it. And I would speak to people who are fundraising in a bunch of different areas, and there was a different standard apply to female businesses. If I didn't get it, I can't invest in it. And I feel pretty confident saying there are a lot of technology businesses people invest in that are beyond something they would ever use or truly understand the algorithmic foundation on which they're built, but they can invest in them because they see their application. So for instance, if you would go in with a fertility business, which is still not easy to fundraise around, if someone in the room, if an investor in the room had a sister, a mother, an aunt, a cousin, a best friend who had struggled with infertility, they would say, oh, I get it. So they needed some personal validation to believe it was an opportunity. And that's one of the things that I hope this book and all these entrepreneurs are able to accomplish, to say, there's huge money here. Mm-hmm. There are huge unsolved problems that women and their partners need solutions for. And the folks who come up with the ones that strike an insight, meet their needs, can deliver a high value product at a price that people are willing to pay, could make an enormous amount of money. So when you look at the relative prevalence of true erectile dysfunction, and that's different than the percentage of people who use erectile dysfunction drug, as you know.
As a recreational drug, basically. As
a performance enhancer, which is fine. 30% of men have ED. Well, 43% of women at some point have these concerns, difficulties. It shows itself in a bunch of different ways, but that's 40% greater. Can you imagine if Viagra and Cialis and Levitra are multi-billion-dollar products? If we could figure this out for women, how huge is that opportunity? And no one has figured it out because, oh, by the way, we're pretty complicated.
Well, I think the bigger issue, or the elephant in the room, is that for men who have true ED, they need a drug or a performance enhancer in order to function or to perform. I hate that word. But they need a performing enhancing product in order to engage in the activity they want to engage in, which is copulation. Actually, in medical school, I had a professor who used to say copulation all the time for sex. And I was in a mood one day and I just raised my hand and I said, Professor, what's the difference between copulation and fornication? Speaking of vocabulary. And without skipping a beat, he was a very serious guy. And without skipping a beat, he said, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, fornication is a sin.
You just can't make this stuff up.
No, I was the one in medical school and all my classmates.
Oh, I could see you would have been trouble. They wanted you to have trouble.
I was in medical school in the early 1980s. And, that's when, everything was still based on the 75 kilogram male. And I was the one in every single class, in every single lecture who would raise my hand and say, how does this apply to women? Or how is this affected by estrogen? And the professors were sick of me because they didn't have the answer, but they didn't care. And they hadn't.
And now they probably work for you.
The ones that are still alive. But I also went to the medical school that was the first medical school ever that had a course on the required curriculum, not an elective, on sex. And it was taught by a wonderful woman who was a psychiatry professor. And this was like breakthrough in the medical school curriculum. And I don't know today how many schools actually have a sex ed class.
One of the things we hear when we do a lot of obviously interviews and work and interact a lot with female health professionals, whether that care is delivered in the context of an obstetrician gynecology setting or primary care. And one of the challenges has been similar to what you used to hear about nutrition. Doctors used to get something like 4 hours of training in nutrition.
I don't think I had that much. And it was part of biochemistry. So it was really like about the chemical compounds of nutrition.
So when you're treating patients, you don't have the education, the foundation, the skills, or the solutions. And the same thing is true for female sexual health. From our research, only 5% of obstetricians and gynecologists ever even discussed arousal with women. Mm-hmm. They might discuss disease prevention, fertility, infertility, menstruation, menopause, any number of other topics. And they would often ask, and we interviewed many gynecologists, they'd say, are you having pain upon intercourse? Mm-hmm. That's a very different question than are you enjoying it?
And that That's where I was going with my thought earlier. And then, of course, as usual, I rambled. But back to this thing about how men with ED can't perform or can't have sex. The problem is women who have hypoactive sexual arousal disorder, or who have decreased libido, or just are not enjoying sex, can still have sex. You know, they can lie there for, 14 seconds and it's done. And so I think that the problem is not as obvious as the horror or shock to a group of investors if a man can't perform. That we need major intervention. But if a woman can't have an orgasm, oh, well, it's Tuesday.
Right. It's very interesting because when you talk about where men and women put things on their priority list. So if you were to come to a woman, if Viagra and the other ED drugs had in fact proven clinically meaningful for women in terms of improving their experience, that would have been a different thing. And because that hasn't, we always joke about, well, you hear that the side effects of these drugs are loss of color vision, blinding headaches, and cardiovascular issues. Very few women in doing years of research are going to raise their hands and say, that's worth it to me.
Right.
Unfortunately, for better or worse, there are a whole lot of women who would say, I'll do that if I lose 20 pounds, but I'm not doing that.
Most of them would say that I'll do that if I lose 5 pounds.
So, it's just an incredibly different focus. It's obviously different physiologically. And the conversation really does need to happen in an entirely different way. So when we use the words that the ED drugs have trained us to use, and power to them, they're serving an important need and they're changing a lot of people's lives. But bigger, longer, stronger, those adjectives do not describe how women think about sex. They don't talk about intimacy as a performance sport.
Right.
And when you talked about, someone, there are all kinds of different degrees of intimacy. And even when you do the clinical tests, it's not only measured on male-female intercourse. There are a whole bunch of other activities that could be included. And then the last piece I'll say on this before I take a breath is if you were to ask, and we did, 100 men what satisfaction was, they would say it's an orgasm. If you asked 100 women the same question, forget about the fact that a third of them never orgasm, which is to me one of the sort of a cruel and unfortunate fate. You'd get 100 different answers. It could be intimacy, it could be closeness, it could be connection, it could be orgasm.
Well, it would also be an essay. It would also be an essay. It wouldn't be
one word
sentence. And I'm not even as you said that, I was thinking, how would I answer that? That's a very big, open-ended question. But if you look at how we do clinical trials, even the Women's Health Initiative, which was the largest study ever conducted on women, it's been parsed every different way, with all kinds of data from this study. So there was a portion of it that looked at sexual satisfaction in women over 50. Now, first it only went up to 80. So they just wrote off every woman over 80. But they defined sexual satisfaction in this clinical trial as frequency. That was how it was measured. It was
I'm sure the FDA point for determining if these products are useful is a statistically significant increase in the number of satisfying sexual experiences. And even if you can say that, when you break it down, there's so much room for confusion. What is statistically meaningful? What is satisfying? What does any of that even mean? So even the metrics that we're using to measure don't make a total amount of sense to women. But you just raised another thought in my head. One of the things that we see in the entrepreneurs that are working in a variety of spaces today is they are now looking at women across the span of their lives. They're not looking at her as a body part or a product category. So she's not just a menstruating woman or a woman who's trying to get pregnant or a woman who is pregnant or a person who's a mom or a person who's going through menopause, but they're looking at what's common across her life. So for instance, you can develop incontinence post-childbirth, and it feels quite the same way as it does if you develop incontinence post-menopause. And rather than saying, well, you're one thing and you're another, the companies that are working on devices in this space are really looking at what's common about what's happening to our physiology, and is there a solution we could find that works on the fundamental weakness of pelvic weakness or vaginal laxity or whatever the case may be, instead of saying you're in this category and you're in this category.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever met Cindy Gallup. If you haven't, she's amazing.
No,
she's in the book. She's a dynamo.
Mm-hmm.
And one of her greatest quotes, and I'll do my best to paraphrase it accurately using her French. She says there's a shit ton of money to be made from taking women seriously. And when you look at this space, whether you're looking at new solutions for menstruation, whether that's new materials in the products, new distribution methods, different approaches to freezing your eggs for fertility, different delivery of fertility options, all different forms and factors of menopausal products. There are so many different options. And right now, what's so exciting to me, as I said, I interviewed 36 people for the book, at least 36. Every day there's a new company. It wasn't like this even 8 years ago. So the conversation is happening. Money is flowing slowly but consistently. And one of the reasons I love this whole concept of orgasmic leadership is I do feel like there's strength in numbers. Mm-hmm. And soon this whisper will become a yell, and this funding will become an avalanche, and these businesses will become large enough that everybody pays attention.
Well, there are now venture funds that are funding just companies that have women's health products, that are women's health startup companies.
Or women's health entrepreneurs, and those companies are amazing. I mean, they're opening up opportunities for funding that didn't exist before.
Yeah,
and many of them are also just focused on diversity, and there's plenty of research in the public sphere that says diverse boards and diverse companies generate better results.
Absolutely. I remember in the early 1990s, I wrote an article for Pharmaceutical Executive magazine where companies thought they were getting it with respect to marketing to women by just making the ads pink. Right. And so the article was called Marketing to Women is more than painting the waiting rooms pink, and really talking about it. And what I found was that it was often very hard for me to get my message across about women's health research and funding women's health research and funding products for women or funding marketing strategies to women. But when I talked about money, then I got people's attention. So I did a talk at UBS, had a big seminar years ago about women's health. And it was right after that movie came out with Cuba Gooding.
Show me the money, Jerry Maguire.
And so I just got up there and I started my speech by saying, show me the money. And that's all we talked about.
That's one of the greatest movie scenes of all time.
And that's one of the greatest movie lines of all time. Maybe second to I'll have what she's having.
Yes. I wrote a few articles about that. Yeah, no, it's funny you say that because I grew up on movies and classic comedies, and even though I'm dating myself, so many of the ones that we've watched 100 times, and interspersed throughout the book are these quotes from movies. My dad, I felt like I learned about business. My dad was in business my whole life until the day he retired. And we always learned from these movies, like, Rocky, I'm going to eat lightning and crap thunder. It was all about, never give up and keep driving. And, so
I love the quote you use in the first chapter, the Tom Hanks quote about long and hard.
There's one movie quote that I love, if it were easy, everybody would have figured it out.
And that movie is from... that quote is from Legally Blonde. Or actually, Harvard, like it's hard.
Harvard, like it's hard to get into.
So what was it? If it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Everybody would be doing it. Throughout the book, there's so many quotes that I use because that was such a part of my growing up education. And then when people ask me, what is the one that really characterizes how you think? So, my father had 2 daughters. He was very athletic. He wanted us to be very athletic. So which we thought we were, but, I'll leave the jury's out on whether my kids believe we were athletic. So we watched every training movie, every Come From Behind, Brian song, Rocky 1 through 5, you name it. And the one that I found has always resonated with me the most. And I write about it in the book. And I use this expression whenever I talk about my dad, who sadly passed away a little over 2 years ago, is the movie Rollerball, the classic movie in 1975 with James Caan. And the movie takes place in a futuristic world where the sport of rollerball is men on motorcycles and with spiked gloves and on roller skates playing this very violent form of roller derby, where the objective is to get this injury-inflicting silver ball into the hole, and the game is over when the other team is totally maimed or dead.
Sounds like a metaphor.
As I always say, as I said, it's not exactly Snow White, but we love these kind of movies. And right before every match, the referee would announce the rules. And he would say, and became our translation, no timeout, no substitutions. No timeouts, no substitutions. And the way we translate, and in the movie, it was you play to the death. But in our life, the way that my dad translated that is, you get in, you play as hard as you can for as long as you can till you can't play anymore. And then you go home, you take a rest, and you come back and you do it again. And you have to play hard, and you have to play fair. And that really, for me, characterizes not only to do anything well, but certainly to be a woman in business, and certainly to be a woman in female sexual health. You know, someone said to me at the beginning of this, when I started to raise money about 10 years ago, you know, this is not for the faint of heart. You have to have a thick skin. You have to have coping mechanisms. You have to have confidence. You have to have skills. You have to know the numbers. You have to know where the money is. There's so many things you have to do well. But the endurance, to me, is what is so remarkable about so many of these people creating these amazing businesses, is not only what they go through personally before they create these businesses, whether it was a health condition that got them to this place or an illness or some experience, but then just their undying commitment to this cause. And I often use the word passion in the book to describe this, not because it's a dirty word like women are emotional and they're passionate, to fight against City Hall and to push this boulder uphill and to find money where it's hard to find. You do have to become passionate and feel like a zealot in terms of focusing on your goal.
Yeah, well, that's what motivates you. Or,
which ultimately is building a business. I'm not saying that's everybody's goal, but certainly for me and the people in the book, it's about building a business that makes money and enables you to solve problems. And oh, by the way, do a whole bunch of other amazing things. If we have a moment, I just wanted to tell you about one of the amazing women in this book. So I mentioned that I went to Duke, and I happen to be reading the Duke magazine, and I spot a story about this young woman whose name is Tsunami July.
I read about her. She is amazing. So tell us.
She's amazing. So
I want to interview her.
Yeah. 2016, I will introduce you. 2016, she'd grown up in India, and she had always worked on projects to help improve the lives of women in the slums of Mumbai. But when she graduated from college, and maybe even before then, she had developed this business. And instead of buy a pair of shoes, give a pair of shoes, which is wonderful, her whole model is buy menstrual pads, help women make menstrual pads, so they not only have a solution and they don't have to miss work or school and could potentially break out of the cycle of poverty, but so they also have an economic engine to support themselves. So woman by woman, community by community, she has trained women how to make these sanitary protection products. And then these women go out and sell them into the community. And as you might imagine, there's, so much shame about female health and certainly female sexuality. And so Suhani is taking one small bite of this and helping women have the language and helping them have some economic power to support themselves and maybe change the cycle that they're in. And what was so exciting, in that category for me of picking her better lucky than smart, 2 years ago, she happened to meet now, Princess Meghan, at a Glamour magazine meeting, and they met and they had a discussion, and long story short, and I didn't know any of this until very recently, Meghan Markle at the time went to visit Suhani's women who were working in Mumbai, and she was very interested. And then lo and behold, a little over a month ago, when Prince Harry and Meghan announced that they wanted people to give money to charities in lieu of gifts, Suhani's company, Meena Mahila, was one of the foundations, one of the charities that was recommended. And on top of that,
The best part of the story.
The best part of this is she got to go to the royal wedding, which is the coolest thing.
With several of her friends.
And what's even, fascinating when you look at this particular young woman, and there's dozens of stories like this in the book and, of women walking around. She had about a year ago been honored with an award from the Queen of England.
Mm-hmm.
And I write in the book, yes, that queen. Mm-hmm. And she had already met Meghan's future-in-law before that was even on the horizon. Mm-hmm. So this is a young woman who created this idea and is having this enormous impact. And certainly, royal family endorsement helps. And for all these businesses, money helps, buzz helps, viral videos help. So sometimes you have to be lucky and be in the right place at the right time. But she's just one of many examples of a person who set out to solve a problem, an enormous, intractable problem, and is making huge progress and literally changing the world.
Absolutely. And it's like what we say to writers, write what you know. What we say to Vagipreneurs or women entrepreneurs is create a business in a space that you know. And she did. She created a business in a space of menstrual hygiene. We actually had a previous...
And a community that she cared about and a community that she grew up near.
And that she identifies with.
She understood.
Right. And a community with a humongous population.
Humongous population and huge need that traditional methods or manufacturing products and costs don't fit into that model.
Right. I think what a lot of us don't understand, we had a previous podcast episode with Serena Prabhasi from WaterAid International, which provides toilets to underserved communities. And I figured what better topic in the ladies' room than to talk about providing toilets. But there are so many communities around the world where girls don't have an actual toilet with, a door and a room around it so that they can change or go to the bathroom when they have their period. And so thousands and thousands of girls don't go to school when they have their periods. They just
Which is just it's almost a silent epidemic. And when you think about that this happens in parts of the world where girls are living in poverty and then they're not getting educated or they're missing 3 or 4 days or a week, a month of school, to break that cycle becomes almost impossible.
Yeah, I remember when I was a teenager, I was an athlete and I was a competitive.
I remember that.
I was a competitive
I remember
swimmer.
you telling me that.
Yeah. So I remember thinking how bizarre it was. There were girls when I was a teenager, and I guess we're the same age, who didn't do gym class or who didn't do sports when they were on when their friend came. And they would sit out for 4 days a month. And you can't do that as a competitive athlete.
No.
There's no like timeout for periods, in sports.
You're competing at the level you're talking about? Absolutely not.
I didn't hear you. What?
When you're competing at the level you're talking about? Absolutely not. And again, what you're just pointing out is that it separates girls from the activities that they want to be doing or they're supposed to be doing when there are solutions. There are a couple other entrepreneurs in the book who have, in addition to taking on issues where they provide better, safer, healthier products made in a different way with better ingredients, they're taking on some of these social issues where, in 46 states in the country, tampons have a luxury tax on them.
Yeah, I know that really irritates me.
As if anyone who's ever used one would describe it as luxury.
Yeah, right. And can I just at least get the luxury tampons then?
And then there's another whole movement, and there are many of these where, we have to have labels about what's in our cereal, but there's no regulation that says there has to be a detailed list of the ingredients that are in the products that we put inside our bodies. So in addition to providing products where, they're carefully labeled and with different ingredients, there are many entrepreneurs in this space who are also fighting to say, let us know what's in these products.
Yeah. And that shouldn't be so difficult.
Oh, by the way, let us not get taxed on things that aren't a luxury.
Yeah, it's really, and it's just another way that we're bearing this increased burden as women. Anyway, I could talk to you about this all day long, but we'll have to save something for next time. But before I let you go, tell me, since this is the ladies' room, aside from this experience, what was the most interesting, memorable, unique, or different experience you ever had in a public ladies' room?
Oh, that's a hard one.
Usually something just pops into mind.
Now, I would say nothing because I'm not easily embarrassed. I would say for some reason there must be a genie, though, who makes sure that whatever stall I'm in, there's no toilet paper. It doesn't matter where I am. I could be in my home. No one's changed it. In an airport, in an office. It's like they say, Rachel's coming in. Let's remove all the toilet paper.
So
because
we need an entrepreneurial
there's
solution.
no shame. You just have to get on with it.
We need an entrepreneurial solution for that. But my low-tech solution for that is I always have a travel size pack of Kleenex in my pocketbook. And actually, I should ask women that question. What's the one thing you have in your pocketbook all the time that you just absolutely have to have that you don't think everyone has? Like aside from like your wallet and your keys.
Eye drops.
Oh, okay. That's a good
My
one.
eyes get dry. That's what I always have, regardless. I like to say that I, have a bag of tricks, and like Mary Poppins, I could pull out a table lamp or an umbrella, but I usually forget most of those other things.
Yeah, I should ask women, what's the most unusual item that ever fell out of your pocketbook? And I remember.
Now that's good, especially when you work in this space. Last night we had my book launch, and someone walks by the table where I'm signing books and picks up some product samples that someone had left. I'm like, wait, are these vibrators sitting on the table? Like, we're talking about orgasmic leadership. We're giving out books.
Getting back to what we talked about originally, about with the kids. People send me product samples all the time of everything from their books to their vibrators. I did get a vibrator sample twice, one of which I thought was good, the other one not so much. But one time I got a shipment from a company I was actually already working with on their advisory board, and they make pregnancy tests and ovulation kits. And my daughter was already a junior in high school. I was just recently separated. And she came home and I had all these, products on the kitchen table. And she was horrified. She's like, Mom, why do you have a pregnancy test on the kitchen table? I said to her, you know what I do for a living, right?
Right.
And I really had to convince her I was not pregnant.
Well, I have
so concerned about being pregnant.
One of my favorite stories that I always share when you talk about the funny things that happen with kids. So when I was working on Zestro, we had a policy that everybody had to answer the phone at some point and speak to customers, because in a lot of businesses, you want to stay close to your consumers. And we wanted to hear what their product experience was. So one day I was on the phones and, hi, this is Rachel. How can I help you? And a woman starts screaming excitedly, not yelling at me. This stuff really works. Thank you, God. And so every time I had to go on a business trip and my kids, when they were little, would be upset that I had to leave, I would say, don't worry, Mommy's going out to do God's work now.
I can't think of a better way to end this interview than on that line. You are truly doing God's work. And on behalf of millions of women, I thank you. How can millions of women find you? Of course, your book is on Amazon and everywhere else. Tell everybody the title again. No one will forget the first part.
Orgasmic Leadership. And the subtitle, if you don't remember that, is Profiting from the Coming Surge in Women's Sexual Health and Wellness. You can always look up my name, Rachel Braun Scherl. The name of my company is Spark Solutions for Growth. But if you probably put orgasmic and my name in it, you'll find articles. I'm thrilled the book came out last week and the Kindle version came out yesterday. So it's
and
really
then next week you hit the big time when your book is going to be on Ask Dr. Donica Your Most Embarrassing Questions on Facebook Live. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. This has been wonderful, and we wish you every success.
Thank you so much, and thank you for what you do and for having all these important conversations and for taking the time and investing your prodigious talents in this space.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.